Welcome to the Farming on Purpose podcast, a podcast for farmers and ranchers ready to shift for a stronger future. Today's challenges in agriculture are new, but the grit and determination required to be successful are not. On the Farming on Purpose podcast, you'll hear how producers of all sizes and practices are moving mountains for things they believe in, all in the name of an industry that keeps growing and innovating for a stronger food system and stronger farm families. I'm your host, Lexi Wright, and I'm excited to discuss where producers are finding success, challenging the status quo, striving for better, and keeping our heritage alive, all while producing the food we depend on. Welcome back to Farming on Purpose. Today I have Heidi Olson with me, and Heidi is the founder of Pathfinder Legacy Advisor, LLC. She is a certified farm succession planner. And Heidi, you're based out of North Dakota, and you actually grew up there as well, right?
That is correct.
And then you've got a just wealth of experience in all of the things that it looks like that I would think it would take to be a farm succession planner. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to where you're at today, how your role works, and maybe a little bit about, why that was the path for you.
Well, thank you, Lexi. Thank you for having me on as a guest today. So it started with my background. I grew up on my family's ranch in the southwest part of the state before I met my husband. Went to college, and in college is when I first got my toes wet in the financial industry, starting out in banking as a teller and then worked my way through all the different departments. I then moved to the capital city of North Dakota. I was in Bismarck for 5 years before I met my husband, worked in banks there. And then I also worked at Edward Jones. So working there gave me an insight to the investment wealth management world. And then when I met my husband and we moved to the northwest part of the state, I worked at a trust department and I worked there for about 22 years. So during that time, I worked at all facets then from the banking industry and then doing the wealth management on top of that, figuring out their plan, what they want, how we need to get there. That's kind of what really got me into that.
We did have a little bit of trouble with the audio in this portion of the interview, so I just wanted to fill you in on what Heidi's talking about. And she's sharing the story of her side of the family's succession plan. She is one of 3 children, and her side of the family's succession plan has looked very different from what her husband's side has looked like. Heidi is the middle child, and she has what she refers to as middle child syndrome, where she's constantly playing the counselor between her older and younger sibling. And she felt like she played that a lot during the transition. She did bring up that there was lots of family meetings, and anger in those meetings kind of looked different than on her husband's side and what that process looked like. And everything is smoothed over now, and they have a good transition plan in place. It just took them some time to get there. We'll dive right back in where we left off.
I just read in one of the North Dakota publications that said a headline was, "Revocable trusts cannot be changed." Well, yes, they can be changed. If there is, and I won't get into this whole topic today, but if something needs to be changed, there is a way that they can be changed. It might take a little extra money, maybe, and steps and attorney fees to do it. But if you absolutely get into something that you don't like and it isn't working for your operation, you can change it. There's ways and means to do it. Everything's fixable. We'll say that. So long story short, that's how I got into this and my passion in seeing to be able to help people, because there are so many farmers and ranchers out there and small business people that really need that bridge that gap, and they don't even know where to begin. And I was reading some statistics the other day, Lexi, that said there's 350 million acres that are due to change hands in the next few years of farmland. So people don't have a plan. That's the backbone of our country, and that is setting us up for failure. Because what's going to happen? I mean, so many of them are run by family farms, and then we're allowing that because we're scared to make a plan. We don't want to have the conflict and the conversation with our family, and we're putting ourselves and our business at risk. And then by that time, it's too late, and we haven't made a plan, and we haven't helped guide that next generation to take over to the business, and then corporations come in, and that's where you have those debacles. And then we sit and we look at each other, or we look in the mirror and like, what just happened? Why are we at this spot? Because you didn't start early enough to make a plan, and you just kept kicking the can down the road, and it will it'll take care of itself. It'll take care of itself, and it never does.
There's several things you touched on there that get really to the heart of what this is about. And a couple of them I see is, that's the worst feeling. We've all been in a situation probably of much less risk there of like you lose the business, you lose the family farm, but we've all been in a situation where it's like, oh, I really wish I had not waited so long to get started on this or to prepare for this. And that's one of the worst feelings in the world because you have shame, you're beating yourself up about it, you've got all of this guilt that you've let people down and things like that. And that's hard to come to the table with then when you know you're behind the eight ball and you're trying to pick up the pieces and make progress, knowing that. So that I think that's part of it. I think the other part is that you mentioned we don't know where to start. We have no idea how to find or what questions to ask to find somebody like you to work with that is going to understand our business and not give us 100-page binder that we pay $5,000 for and doesn't help us or
Right.
we don't know how to implement. So that's a couple of the things that I wanted to make sure that we discuss today is, how do we even think about getting started on this process? And then how do we make sure we come to the table, regardless of what our role is in the operation? We all bring our own baggage in our own different ways to the table. How do we come when this process has begun in a way that is going to be beneficial to what we're trying to preserve, the legacy of the farm?
Oftentimes, no one wants to go to meetings. No one wants to sit down and go to meetings. So first off, I will say, if you're setting up that first conversation, don't do it at the kitchen table. That's one of my first things I tell clients. Find a neutral location to meet, whether you have a office on your farmstead to go to that office, or you're in the shop or the barn or where have you, if you've got a location. If not, but find some place in town. Or maybe, the attorney that you're working with, oftentimes they'll allow you to use their meeting room. So don't do it at the same table. Do not conduct business at the same table that you are going to be having Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas or any holiday gathering. That needs to be saved for family time, because then you're always going to have, if there's a blow up, you're always going to have those family memories there. The first part I really to take back is, if you have that individual that says, I'm not going to that meeting, say, hey, I have my goals that I want to share with you, and I want you to understand what my thoughts are. Why don't you come to this meeting too? And let's just take 30 minutes. Just take 30 minutes and let's just start sitting down. And this is what I want to talk about. So when I start family meetings, one of the first things I do is I get everyone in the room, go around the table, and I want you to tell me first where your family is at, where your farm business is at. And then I want to know what role each person plays in that. And the third one is, what do you see for the future for you for that farming business? And as everyone goes around the table and shares their thoughts, where they're at, and it can kind of get an idea put together on what each person's role playing and what they see themselves for their future role. Because do they want to still see themselves in the business as a laborer and they're fine doing that? Or do they want to have more management? Do they want to get into talking to the banker and any of their resource they need to talk to, or any cash rent or sharecrop leases or what have you, building those relationships, that plan for the farming operation. So then I kind of get that we're not going to make all these decisions in one day, whether we do it in 30 minutes or an hour, and set a time limit on that meeting. Don't set it where you're going to lose everybody. Don't have that meeting for 3 hours. 'Cause by the time you're sitting there, they're watching their phone, gonna have the clock saying, we got to get out of here. We don't want to sit in here. And have an agenda. Keep it to an agenda and have somebody take minutes. Then every voice is being heard. I was in a have been in several family meetings where one of the family members starts talking and somebody else cuts them off. No, they have a voice too. Let them, and then once they've completed their thought, then let's let the next person, you can add in any rebuttal that you want or what have you. But it really needs to be conducted like a business meeting. And as often as people don't want to hear, I mean, they're really good at managing their farms and ranches or whatever production agriculture they're in. They're really good at managing that. They're not always, they're so close to that that it's taking that step back and not thinking about the business. What do our financials be looking at them more than once a year? How many people, we're guilty of it on our farm too. It's how many times are we putting our numbers in every month to see where we're at?
So I think when people come to these family meetings, a lot of times maybe they have expectation or a lack of expectation of how it's going to go. So I could see how that 30-minute kind of like, let's just test the waters and see what's on people's minds first could really help. Because, I think a lot of we build those things up in our mind and worry that it's going to be something that we have to respond to in the moment with all of the emotion that we've maybe been pinning up in our hearts for 50 years at that point. You never know.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's a very charged moment. What else do you guys do or work on to make sure that folks can come to the table and get kind of past those things?
I tell them this, whatever's happened in the past, you have to leave in the past. Don't keep bringing those things up. And it might not be, it's easier said than done, but I was in another family meeting where the mom couldn't even sit still. And that one happened to be at the kitchen table. And then after that, I said, no more meetings at the kitchen table. She couldn't even sit still. She kept getting up and going and adjusting the thermostat because she didn't want to hear. And it was just too much anger and animosity and thinking about the shift in control over to the son. And well, they still look at him as an 18-year-old boy rather than a man that can make these business decisions for himself and has ideas and a voice too. So, to be successful for everyone, here's the ground rules to start with. As I mentioned earlier, not having them at the kitchen table, finding a neutral meeting location, and then here's what we're going to discuss today. So that way there's no, oh boy, we're really having to make decisions today on who's going to be the one in charge of the farm plan for next year. No, we're not even getting to that because we need to find what everybody really wants to do. So what they might think that son number one wants to do, son number two wants to do, and son number one has completely other ideas in his head, and he's okay with those changes. So you can't come with a lot of assumptions either, thinking that's what they want until you sit down and talk to them. Keeping it basic, pinpointing, maybe this is one specific area of our business that we really need to discuss after doing that first meeting, and then creating those agendas and taking notes, finding who is the best person to take notes. If someone doesn't want to take notes, there's so many different things out there with technology, AI, and so forth that you can use, and just use your phone and have your phone take notes. And then oftentimes it's recording your voice as well. And someone can't come back and say, well, I never said that. Well, okay, let's go back to the meeting notes to say, because we don't want to be pointing fingers at anybody. We need to focus on the future and getting over whatever frustration somebody might be having and move forward with our business, because time is of the essence. So that's, the success pieces, and making sure that they are having, do they need to have weekly meetings? Do they, for sure, monthly meetings? Depending on the operation, you should be looking at what's taking place that time of the year, seasonal items, who's going to do what chores, who's going to be on vacation or out, because everybody is allowed time away from the farm. Especially if you live there, you never get time off. You see your work every day. If you go to work 8 to 5 and have a corporate job, you don't sleep there at night. You do get to leave. And we forget to give ourselves that grace in the farming industry that we do need to step away and have time off. So who's our backup? Who's going to do those duties for us if we're gone? And communicating that. So then there's not like, well, I didn't know, nobody told me, I didn't know that's what you were doing. Well, no, we talked about it. So do you need to have more than monthly meetings? Perhaps having a bi-weekly or a weekly meeting. And oftentimes, so this is the other communication piece, and I would always tease my husband about this. So when I was still working in town, and before his dad had retired, his dad would come up, or they would meet out in the shop and they talk about what their plan was for the day. And I'd be talking to my husband later at lunchtime and saying something. He's like, well, well, remember, Heidi, we already talked about this. This is what I'm doing today, or where I'm going. Wait a minute. We didn't talk about that. I think that's what conversation either you had in your head or you had with your mom or dad. And then he'd sit and thinking, he's like, oh, yeah, I can't keep it all straight. He would tell me, he's like, I got too much going on. Like, that's true. So if you are having these meetings, because we get going in so many directions, even if it's just a quick conference call and saying, hey, let's meet at 7:30, and everybody's busy to get the kids off to school. Okay, what's the plan for today? Or if there's a central location, it's in the barn. All right, what do we have going? And plans change. That's the other thing is that one family member at a meeting I was at, they're like, well, I can't always get there, and you guys aren't telling me what's going on. Well, this is what we might have planned for the day, but then something else breaks down or something happens, and it's not 100% sure all that's what we're doing for the day. So plans change, and how are you going to communicate that? Communication is the biggest hurdle that people have, because how often do we get text messages and we read a text message and we're like, oh, yep, I answered it. We've answered it in our head, but we've never answered it specifically to the sender. So it's the same thing in business. We need to make sure what we're thinking, that we are voicing those thoughts and getting them answered.
I've had somebody on the podcast before that has advised people to treat it more like a professional coworker versus your brother or your dad or your wife, because we communicate with them all day long in a lot of different nuanced ways, but if you, when it's time to talk business, are more like, okay, this is a time when I'm talking to you as a coworker. Here's what is going on today, or here's the things that we need to line out. I think it changes how we communicate, and it changes sometimes the level of communication that is received too, in a good way. So the communication piece is so important. One of the things that I think we a lot of times run into, and I'm sure you have lots of experience with this, is when we get to those meetings, we often kind of fit into different stereotypes of maybe a younger generation that is pushing for these decisions because they know that they need to be in place before mom and dad get too old, or something happens, and maybe a dad or a mom who's very reluctant, or somebody who is there but doesn't really want to give their opinion because they know they've not been listened to in the past or something like that. So we a lot of times have those stereotypes in our families and have to figure out a way to move forward still. Do you have any suggestions for how to maybe deal with some of those different stereotypes and get people to a point where we can communicate?
Well, one of the things I think about firstly is that change and control are two of the biggest hurdles. Change and control. So each generation or each level of ownership needs to take that step back and look at what generation are they. I know we hear so much about the millennials and Gen Z and so forth, but really everyone has grown up in a different era. So they process things differently, and how they accept change and how they learned versus how our children are learning and what they expect. So, and just even that communication, and not to keep hitting on that. So if you can't see what their personality traits are, you're taking that into account. What are their personality traits? How do they communicate? Do they communicate by text, or is it a phone call, or is it a Zoom call, or in person? Guaranteeing that you have 100% of their undivided attention. So figuring out those areas.
There's somebody that when you try to communicate with them, you always are going to be like at opposite ends of the spectrum, or you say one thing and they interpret it entirely different. What are maybe some communication strategies to bridge those gaps?
I'll use my father-in-law, for example. So he is 86, and he said he was farming until he was 80. So how are we going to communicate with my father-in-law and my mother-in-law and begin that conversation? We went to them. I mean, we knew that Grandpa was going to farm until he was 80 because he had made those comments from time to time, but we had to do the preparation work up until then, and not just like, okay, now you're at 80 and are we going to phase into it? Or now all of a sudden at 80, flip the switch and you're done. So how are we going to approach that? So one of the things that we did is I let my husband take the reins on that first. We talked about things, and we knew that he looked at women in a completely different manner than the way women are looked at today. So I have the business knowledge, I've got the financial background, but when he grew up, his mom didn't work off the farm. His mom took care of the house, and she took care of the yard and raised their family, and that's what they did. And it was more of the same thing with grandma as well. She worked a little bit in town, but women had their place and men had their place, and their roles were completely separated. So figuring out, you really got to look at their background too and figure out how to approach them, and not just be like, well, come in guns a blazing and this is what I'm going to do because I'm German and this is how we should do things. You have to look at their personality traits. And sometimes it's not such a bad idea either to do personality profiling. I mean, there's so many of them out there that you could easily have access to see, are you a type A personality, or are you a yes man and saying, okay, this, just whatever you tell me, Dad, I'm going to do because it's comfortable for me. And that's where I'm at. Approaching that situation, knowing personalities, trying to avoid conflict, which isn't always going to happen, but if that conflict never gets completed at the end of the day, you're still always going to have this cloud hanging over. But really knowing their background and where they're coming from. And they didn't expect that I would be working as long as I did in town because they hadn't had any other women in the family that did that. I mean, we couldn't afford for me not to be working because we just started out at farming ourselves. So who was going to take care of the benefits and all those things? But I had to take that step back and really think, okay, I can't come to the table for this conversation because he doesn't know where I'm coming from until my husband breaks the ice first and shares what we want. And then later I came to the table for that conversation, and it was much smoother. And then I think they were more relieved too, because then it wasn't like they were having their, wall put up in front of them thinking, oh man, they're coming at us and we are not going to have answers for them. They know all this stuff. My husband originally was going to school for accounting, and then he was a VOAG teacher. So he knew the numbers by the back of his hand. Grandma did the numbers, but Grandpa knew them, but he didn't know them like Grandma knew them, but Grandma wasn't out in the field. Separation there where my husband was doing all of that himself. So he knew exactly what field was producing where we're at. So breaking it in and having some compassion when you're talking to them, that's a huge, and not expecting that everything is going to happen in one meeting or within 6 months. It takes time.
I think that's one of the hard parts is that it does take a lot of time. This entire process it's a big deal. And that's, I think, part of the reason that, people avoid it because it's intense emotionally, it's intense time wise. And then you have to get all of these assets and all of these records together to work with someone like you to do a good job. So we avoid it. But what was the stat you said at the beginning of how many acres are going to change hands?
350 million acres are scheduled to change hands in the next, I believe it's 5 to 10 years. And of those acres, they're owned by ages 65 plus. So they're already set up where I hope, you hope they don't have any health conditions. You hope that they still have all their faculties, that they can make a plan and not all of a sudden assets have been depleted because they haven't made a plan because now they're needing additional health care or additional financial needs. So what can they do to help avoid those things is they really need to start today. There really is no good time to start, is just picking today is the day for that first conversation. We have 2 daughters. Our oldest will be 21. Our youngest will be 18. They've heard enough of this over the last few years that they're just like, oh, Mom, okay, we've heard enough of you talking about these things. They're talking about death and talking about change of management and finance. We sat them down last weekend and we talked to them about, okay, here's what we have planned and here's our power of attorney documents and this is what our expectations are of you. Yes, you girls have been out running the business with us, but if something happened to your dad or I, what would we want you to do with equipment, the commodities, These are the decisions that are required. So it's heavy stuff, and they didn't like the conversation, but it was definitely warranted. So they're better prepared, and they can't come back later and say, well, we didn't know. Now they know what is expected of them, and they should be paying closer attention to some of those financial matters when we're talking, right? Because they don't always want to listen to us when we're talking. But all right, the point, take notes here. Mental note, take notes is what we'll tell them. So,
And I think sometimes you do have to be very blunt or upfront with those conversations with younger people, because it just like that's not where our heads are at that age. We're not thinking about those things. And you have to be very concrete in your language about, this is what it is for it to really sink in. I mean, at least I know that's how I was at that age. One of the things, I mean, that number of acres that's going to be transitioning hands is just a really scary number to me, because our world is in a very interesting place in this day and age. And I think that just kind of adds to the aspect of like, what does agriculture even look like in the future? We hope that this land that's changing hands is going to continue to be in the hands of producers. But is that the case if we don't do this preparation? I don't know. And that's a scary thought to think about. One thing I think would be interesting to know, and maybe you know this, is the size of that acreage. Like, what chunks is it in that's transitioning? Because that could be a really wonderful opportunity for young producers or beginning producers who are looking to get into ag, for these farmers or ranchers who maybe don't have a generation to pass the land on to.
I'll have to look into that. I did not see that part with my statistics because there are so many different sizes and types of production agriculture, but I'd have to look to see what the majority of it is. And then the other thing is, where is most of it concentrated? I just thought of that too. Are we looking to see more that is concentrated in the South, where that's where some of the older generational farms are? Or, where are we seeing that? I know in North Dakota specifically, the average age of our farmers are 60 years old. And I look around to our neighbors and so forth, and I ask some of the neighbors, what is your plan? What are you going to do? Well, they have a son that lives out of state, and they have a daughter that lives out of state, and they're each doing their own thing. And he's one of the younger of his siblings. His parents are deceased now, but he's the only one that would be able to farm. Okay, so what do you plan to do? And it's, what, I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure what we're going to do. A lot of families too, they'll just take and they'll put it into a trust, and that might not always be the answer, but it's at least stays in the family and is protected. It's in a trust, and then the trust rents it to other local producers, so they still keep that farmland. But it can't be put in a trust forever. At some point in time, that trust is going to terminate, and the land will be distributed out to the children. Then it's up to them to decide what they want to do. But it's really a thought process that as we have less and less of our family members coming back to farm, what is a solution? What is a solution? Either you have to continue to evolve and grow your operation and become more diversified so you can afford to bring family members back and make it viable for them, or you have to figure out a way that we're just not going to be able to continue to farm. We'll continue to own it, and maybe we rent it out to the neighbors. But it's a plan. It just sometimes isn't always easy to have those family members come back. But there's nothing wrong with having neighbors or working with them as well, or other friends that may be producers that can help take over your business.
I think I say pride, a little less pride in some of those aspects is sometimes better for the community as a whole when it comes to agriculture. Do you want your neighbor who maybe you felt like you're in competition with your whole life to have this opportunity, or do you want it to, just go to who knows who, or who knows what corporation? That's a question I think we have to ask ourselves of what is most important in that situation. And I don't know the answer, but I think the other piece of this that I want to touch on is, a lot of times when we have these transition and succession planning conversations, we're thinking about really big, in quotation marks, operations who maybe have multiple family members who are full-time on the operation. And that's not the case for so many people who are getting started in agriculture today. But I think this succession planning and piece is still important, even if you don't have all those folks full time on the farm. Is there any tips or strategies that you can give maybe those producers who still have a town job or are, in partnership with a brother and they have 40 acres that they're doing cows on part-time, strategies that they can kind of think about so that they're still prepared when this conversation comes to them?
The number one question is, how long do they want to operate the farm themselves? So if they are still working in off-farm job to subsidize, what have you, so can my operation sustain what I need to continue to compete with the cost of living increases and the increasing cost of inputs? All right, so you get those questions answered, and then mapping out, well, is it better if I take the land that I own and rent it to my brother and he has everything and then I just receive the cash rent off of that? Or can I expand or be more diversified with other entities that I can supplement with? Where do I want to grow? I mean, those are not hard questions to ask, but it's really something that a lot of people need windshield time to think about is, do I want to be more on the farm and expand? And can I expand? Maybe that's not always an option where they can expand. Maybe where they're at, the land prices are so high to purchase or rent prices are high. But if that doesn't work, then maybe I need to consolidate more with my brother or a neighbor, or whoever I'm working with. So that's the number one part, is looking at the numbers. What does the financial side say, and really seeing if it's viable for that. And then the next step is, how am I going to get there? Not only looking at those numbers, but all right, so am I young enough yet? Am I in my 40s? Can I continue this? Or how long do I want to work? Am I going to continue to work until I'm 50, 60? What do I see for myself for retirement? I've had a family member that they retired from one position, and at 47, well, I might want to come back to farm. Okay, how are you? So to start fresh again, let's look at that and see what it really, where are you going to do? I mean, it was a livestock production, so you're going to have to buy into herd. Cattle are at a high price right now. Or is it that you just want to have a couple of heads so that way your family can still be involved with 4-H or FFA or what have you and do those things? So you don't want to put yourself in debt either, because you still need to enjoy life for your mental health. I mean, that's such a huge thing with egg producers, is sometimes we feel so drawn to it because that's how we grew up and we feel like we can't ever get out and this is the only thing is, and we have to do it. But we don't have to do it. And that's the part that we have to remind ourselves. We don't have to feel obligated that that's the road we have to go down because that's what mom and dad did and that's what their expectations are for me. But we don't have to. So we have to do what makes sense for you, your mental health, and for your financial, and for your family. And that's it's a long answer to your question, but there are so many pieces to look at of the puzzle to really take a hard look at it.
It is, and it's a lot to piece together, especially when things change and everything changes in ag. There is just by the nature of the business. There's a lot of risk involved, and I think that's another piece that always keeps us from starting this process is like, oh, well, maybe next year, corn will be higher, and then we'll start it then, or who knows what it is. But you've seen these operations and these conversations between lots of families. If there was a piece of advice that you could give to maybe anybody that's starting this process, what would it be?
I had mentioned it earlier. So the one piece I have is, let's schedule a 30-minute meeting with our family. And they may not want to come to the table, but I have my goals and my wishes that I want to share with you so you know where I'm at, and I want to hear and understand what you want. So those are the two biggest things. Is I want you to know where I'm going, and I want to know where you want to go. So if you don't have an idea or plan in mind, they might not, but you can at least start that conversation with what you want. And it works on both sides, whether it's the owner side or the successor side, sharing that conversation, just like we did with my in-laws. We know you are going to retire at 80. This is what we think we can do. Now, how can we get there together? Because if you at least don't have any idea of where you're going, conversation isn't going to happen. And sometimes it might be having a meeting to spitball and to throw out ideas.
So that kind of plays into, I think, when we have these conversations, we're possibly anticipating some change in how the business is run because of the change of how people do things, or maybe their interests or things like that. And with that comes questions of if the numbers make sense. Is that something that when folks start working with a succession planner, like, do they need to have that already figured out, or is that something that you can kind of help walk them through?
So it's something that I will help walk them through because they might not have everything put together now and figuring out what their vision is, where we're going. Okay, now let's look at the numbers and see if that matches that vision. Because I've looked at a lot of financial statements, a lot of balance sheets, P&Ls and so forth to see, and not everybody does that. Not everybody has that experience to do that and to point them in the right direction. Okay, well, this is where I see could be a loophole. Let's see if we can get through that and make a plan that is going to be successful for everybody and not put you or the operation further into debt.
Well, I want to give people the opportunity to connect with you if they want to, learn more or maybe start one of these conversations with you. If for whatever reason they're not able to work with you, you're one person. I know that everybody has capacities. What are a few things that they should make sure that a succession planner they're working with is either has in place or understands, is able to kind of walk through with them?
Well, the biggest thing is experience. And that experience needs to be more than just a family mediator. They need to have experience on both sides of the desk. And that might be an anomaly in today's world, but they should have an understanding of the financial piece to be able to read the financials. They should understand family dynamics and to be that mediation person, in addition to understanding there's going to be IRS rules and regulations and with the different types of entities that they're setting up. They need to know about those different vehicles, I call them, whether it's an LLC or a trust, whether it's irrevocable or revocable, and being able to help guide you and explain those things to them. Because if they can't do that and they're just more of a family mediator, well, you could go to any other person and just be like, okay, we just need somebody to help get us through our family meetings. It's more than just that. You have to look at everything and being able to know who are the best advisors that need to be in the toolbox. Because if there's something that I don't know, I'm not afraid to admit that I don't know something. But let's find out. Let's ask questions and let's find out and let's do it together. And then also helping to guide them once their documents are complete. It's not a one and done. A lot of times attorneys, and I'm not saying all of them, they'll just say, here, sign on the dotted line. You're complete. This is your document. Put a red bow on it. You're good. Okay, what does that mean? Tell me what that means. And that's where I would have that experience on the backside. And you, whoever you're working with, should be able to help explain those things to you. If they can't, the attorney better explain it to you or the accountant. So don't be afraid to ask questions. That's the biggest thing, is ask questions. So if you're paying for an advisor to help you, they have to have that all-encompassing experience, and they really should know more than just one lane. You have to wear many hats.
That's really helpful. And I think it's nice to kind of just have some questions in mind when you go out to try to find somebody to help you. Like, these are the things I need to be aware of that they have in place. So if folks wanted to follow up with you, how can they go about that?
So I do have a website. You can find me at pathfinderlegacy.com, or you can email me at Heidi@pathfinderlegacy.com. So that's where I can be reached on my website. I also have, for my email address is listed. I do have a podcast show that's listed there as well as my phone number.
Perfect. Well, we'll include your podcast in the show notes too. And you do, the first step with you is that 30-minute discovery call, right?
That is correct. Yep. We're wanting to figure out, just do a little bit of discovery to see where you're at with your planning and what I can do to help you.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Heidi. I appreciate all of the knowledge you're sharing with our listeners. And I hope everybody takes a moment, even if it's only a moment, to think about where they might be in this process and what steps they need to take to get on the right course for their own operation.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed spending time with us today, please take a moment to review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or join the conversation on social media. Do you have a topic you would like to discuss or know someone with a story to share? Apply to be a guest on the podcast at farmingonpurpose.com. You can follow the host of Farming on Purpose, Lexi, on your favorite social media platforms for more content by searching for Farming on Purpose. And remember, if you look around your table and aren't inspired by the people there, it's time to find a new seat.